All right, welcome once again to Growth is Personal podcast. Today is going to be an amazing time. I have with me on the podcast today Vanesa Cotlar. Vanessa is an ambitious HR leader who has worked in 20 countries. I've seen Vanessa, I've observed and watched and followed Vanessa for I think over a year now on LinkedIn, and the posts and the insights she shares on HR topics and recruitment and hiring and people and culture, is something that resonates with me. So today I say, you know what, we have to talk about unpacking. And if you look at the trend today, we see a lot of, hiring trends and people looking for jobs and all that has to do with employment. So I wanted to have that kind of conversation today that goes beyond just personal growth and development, but something that has to do with what really matters to a lot of people, getting jobs. So today, I'm going to be discussing this with Vanessa. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's jump right in. Now, 2024, we're almost wrapping up the year, and we see a lot of, hiring conversations going on, people looking for jobs, people who are being laid off. I mean, tech companies laying off. And now people, a lot of anxiety as to, if my job is going to be, is there security in my job, or how am I going to find the next job? So today, let's talk about as a leader in the people and culture space and HR space, what are the top skills that employers are looking for and prioritizing in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it definitely varies by employer, varies by job. When we think about skills, there's skills like, if I had to say the top ones that I see, things like communication, being able to speak clearly, share perspectives, especially, if you're in a more technical position, speaking about technical things in a non-technical way goes a really long way. I think that a huge thing is ownership, being reliable, being someone that can be counted on to deliver, desire for growth. So people that are not just joining a company for that one thing, but that are looking for ways that they can essentially have a career there. Or, we know careers can be shorter in an organization now, but just people with that growth mindset, right? Like looking for ways that they can grow and expand within their role or the scope of what they're doing. I think those can be some general things that can make candidates attractive, but I do think it really varies, right? It's different if you're looking for a software engineer or a customer success specialist in terms of some of those harder skills that you may also be looking for in candidates.
Okay, you mentioned growth mindset. I want to take you on that because I think it's something that comes up a lot of times in conversations around hiring. What exactly, when we talk about growth mindset, what exactly is an employer looking for? Or what kind of conversations would prompt the hiring manager to know that this candidate has a growth mindset?
Yeah, good question as well. I think it depends in terms of, again, the context a little bit. I think in the context of employment, a really, really good way to look at whether someone has that mindset is, are they looking for feedback? You know what I mean? Like, are they looking to get information on how they're doing, the good, the bad, how they can improve? I think that being the type of human that seeks to learn is super, super important to showcase that growth mindset. And also when you're seeking to learn both about how you're doing, but also how are others doing, right? What can I learn from others? What are experts in my field doing? What ideas can I pull and bring into what I'm doing today? And also learning from each other, and by each other meaning potentially others in an organization or peers, around how do we collaborate together? So I think kind of looking at the entire ecosystem that surrounds you and how you can expand that scope of the learning and thinking beyond just, what am I doing today, but what else can I continue to learn and grow and do?
Great. So from what you're saying, if I hear you correctly, so when the candidates show that they are willing to, they're willing to go beyond business as usual, and they're willing to add value beyond just when they start their jobs, to say and I hear this a lot of times when the candidates would ask questions around what are my expectations in the next 90 days. Are those this kind of conversations that hiring managers want to hear, that these people are ready to hit the ground running and they even have a plan for the next 90 days?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that you said that, in the context of new hires and onboarding. I think it really is the role of the manager to think, what do I want this person to achieve in the first 30, 60, 90 days so that they can come in and hit the ground running. But I do think it's awesome when someone else that joins comes in and says, hey, like, I hear you. I've also put together what I think would be amazing to achieve in the first 30, 60, 90 days. It just shows that initiative and that next step and interest in the role. I do think when we think about just the broader sense of the expansion of scope or role, doesn't necessarily mean just work longer hours. I think a lot of the times what it means is like make good connections. Like, how does my work tie to the broader company goals? How does my work tie to what other people are doing? How does my work tie to industry trends? So thinking about beyond just like your role as being just in isolation, and thinking about all the different connection points and how you can expand.
Okay, great response. Now, how has the hiring trend or hiring process evolved over the years, and what should professionals begin to look for, or what should they be expecting in 2024, and the year beyond, when it comes to the hiring process?
Yeah, I think that when we think about evolution of hiring processes, how people apply for jobs has literally changed so much. To apply for a job, you used to look at an ad in the newspaper, right? You used to call in, and then we were submitting paper resumes, cover letters, and started submitting resumes and cover letters through some online tools and applications. And I think in the last little while, the biggest topic of conversation is AI and automation through artificial intelligence in terms of how resumes are screened, how candidates are filtered, scores that are given to humans that apply for jobs. I think that what that does is, especially for larger companies, for people that potentially have more of an untraditional path but want to get into a role, now it can honestly be harder if a company is not actually reviewing candidates with that human lens in mind. I will say, I think what's interesting is in terms of the resume cover letter pairing, I actually think we're moving away from the cover letter. I don't really think companies are really reading them that much or taking them as something that's really required. I think we're moving much more to that real-time resume approach where you can see someone's set of experiences on something like LinkedIn, and you can see where they worked, what they're up to. And a resume, and writing also is good to have in part of an application process, but we're moving more towards this like live trend of what are you currently doing today. I will say, I think one of the things that I've really noticed is applying for jobs has moved a lot more towards networking. I know this is something we'll probably touch on a little bit more later, but I think that building networks ahead of needing them can be super helpful for when you're then looking for a job. So maybe I'll pause there and give you space to have a couple follow-ups.
It's good you brought up networking, because that is one of the, I think it's becoming a buzzword now, but it's also very scary to some people. Like, some people, once they hear networking, they shut down, like, especially the introvert. So how can an introvert, for example, build those relationships that open the doors for opportunities for them?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I always say networking can feel overwhelming and really intimidating because I think a lot of people leave it until they really, really need it. So then there's a lot of pressure on it, right? Imagine if you want to run a marathon and you show up race day to run the marathon and you've never trained and you're like, let's do this marathon. That's going to be overwhelming. And most of us are probably not going to do super well on that marathon, right?
Yes.
So just like anything else, if you want to finish that marathon, or in the future, you're going to want to run a marathon, maybe you need to start going outside and just going for like a short run today, no pressure run, but just get outside or even go for a walk, baby steps, right? It's really, really hard to run a full marathon if you've never done anything to prepare. it's a funny analogy to think about, but if you're in that moment where you really need a job, and on top of that, you're like, I need to network now. I have to build this network today. That's a lot of pressure on yourself. And I think the mistake that people can make is you start building a network only thinking about your own needs and this is about me. Whereas if you think about a network, like what is a network, right? It's a set of interconnected relationships, or the nodes, if you think about it more from like the traditional standpoint, right? And the idea is that there's mutual connections. So I think that when it comes to networking, the time to start is now. If you're introverted, no problem. What is one small thing that you feel comfortable doing? Is it commenting on someone's LinkedIn post? Yay, you did the thing for today. That was the thing you wanted to do. Is it showing up to an event where, I don't know, maybe I don't like it, but I'm showing up to a speaker session. I just have to sit and listen. Maybe I'll have a conversation with someone towards the end. I think if you think about the small things that you feel comfortable doing ahead of needing that network, that's how you start to build over time. I always say part of why it can feel overwhelming is it feels like perhaps you're just going to ask someone for something, right? So if I say, hey, I need this to someone that I barely know, that can feel really overwhelming to do. But if instead you flip it and you're like, hey, is there anything that you're looking for help with, or anything that I can do for you? This is what I bring to the table. It helps create more of that open dialogue and then plants the seed for a future mutually beneficial relationship too.
Great. I like the fact that you highlighted the fact that networking is not just about what you want. It's about what the other person's want. And I know at some point I used to, when I came into Canada back in 2015 and trying to find a job, one of the things I did was to go volunteer. Like, and some people think networking is about like you mentioned, events and all, but also how can you add value to, based on your expertise or experience, how can you add value to society or the community or an organization? So I looked for an organization based on my experience in coaching and advising and stuff, and I went to an organization. I volunteered, and that opened doors for me. So I think what we're seeing today is that people now need to unpack networking. That it's not just about I'm going somewhere with my resume and I'm going to give someone and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. You have to know, what is my work? What value do I have? And how can I add that value? Let's talk about portfolio, because I hear a lot of times people saying now the career has shifted from, just climbing up a ladder, but now building portfolios of your career such that you are not just deep, but you have breadth. Can you share more on what your thought is about building career portfolio? Because when I look at your profile, for example, I can see some bucket of portfolios you've built over time. How is that very helpful in today's workplace?
Yeah, just so we're speaking the same terms, when you say portfolio, help me understand a little more how you see that.
So how I see it is, traditionally, most people, not just the millennials, baby boomers and stuff, the idea of career has been, stay in a place, maybe just grow, get to a certain level, and then maybe life happens and boom, they're out of job and all, and maybe they've only built experience in a certain space. But what we are seeing today in the trends in career development is that people are now building buckets of career experiences, and we call them portfolios. So for example, someone who's a HR professional, but also have added something around policy. So they've gone to do something in the policy area. They've built a career portfolio in policy such that when an opportunity comes outside of HR, they are able to still be relevant in that space. That's where I mean by portfolio. So what is—
No, I hear you. I hear you. It's funny that you say that. I would say many of us for years have called it, instead of the career ladder, the career jungle gym. I don't know if you've heard that before, but it's the idea that it isn't, you're not just going in one direction, but you're trying lots of different things that are around, and you're going to go a little bit over here and then come a little bit over here. And it's not so much just this one straight path, but that you're testing all the different ways, and then it helps you understand things better. So I think that concept of, exploration is definitely one that's become more common. I think that, to your point, it can be intentional or unintentional, right? So I think for me, happy to share a little bit more about my experiences and how mine went. But I started in strategy and operations consulting. I was a management consultant at Deloitte, which is a very large consulting firm within Monitor Deloitte, which is a strategy group there. And that really was business strategy and operations. So my foundation is built there, right? We were working with CEOs and executives, companies in terms of like, how do we ensure that the businesses are running well? And from there, I moved into the tech and startup space, and I co-founded an HR tech startup. While I was a management consultant, I also led recruitment for our function of the business, which was more of a side of desk thing. But because I was doing that, I had a good sense around like talent management, how people were coming into the business. I did a lot of coaching for new hires as well. And it was interesting because when I transitioned into the HR tech space of building a startup in that space, it was really to solve a problem that I had experienced in my prior role. And then when the startup ultimately failed, I just continued down that HR tech path, right? So I moved into a role around supporting the building of tech companies from the HR side of things in Winnipeg, where I am today. Then I moved into another tech company and was just running the people side of things there. And then, almost 3 years ago, in 2 weeks, I moved into my role at PolicyMe. So I think it's been a journey. If I take a step back, did I always know that this is where it was going? No, but that's how most people's careers tend to go. You find opportunities as you explore and you figure out, the things that you enjoy and that you're good at. And that's where I think, definitely for me, having a stronger background in, a business degree, an MBA, and all that time in strategy consulting really helps in terms of how HR fits into the business. And I look at it always from a business lens because that's how I grew up. But I think that when you think about your career, there's many ways that it can unfold. And for some people, it tells more of a story, kind of like the one I just told you. But other people try lots of things. Like I know someone that was a doctor for 10 years and then decided to become a teacher, right? Like when you think about a story like that, it's not really a story that is a joined session of experiences, right? Someone was here and then they decided to just like totally go here. Or I know an accountant that, did their CPA, thought they wanted to be in accounting, was practicing for a couple of years and was like, I love marketing. So yes, were they better at numbers in their marketing function? For sure. But they weren't really using their CPA knowledge in their day-to-day anymore. So I think that very long answer to your question, but I think it depends, right? I think that people just have access to more knowledge about potential things they can do professionally than they did before. And sometimes it layers and it builds, and sometimes it just goes in different directions. And I think both are okay. It's just about that exploration of what is it that you enjoy doing.
Great. Okay. So building on that, how can professionals use that to their advantage when they're trying to look for opportunities, right? So for someone who has built different buckets of experiences, how can they now leverage that to get the next opportunity?
I think it's like with anything else, you know what I mean? What was the impact that you had where you were? What did you learn? And how does it apply to this next thing that you're trying to do? It depends on the set of experiences, right? And the role that you're going to be aiming to achieve next. Maybe if you did spend some time doing some financial analysis and then you spend some time in marketing and now you want to move into operations, you can talk about how the skills you learned in both make you a better operator, right? So I think it's about that narration and the story that you're putting together based on the impact and the learnings from each role.
Great. You mentioned storytelling. I hear that a lot now, in the recruitment space, that most of the success in interviews are usually the fact that this person told a better story. Is that the case in your observation, or is it more of competencies that helps hiring managers decide on who they're going to hire?
I mean, I think communicating what you bring to the table is important. I would say someone that can just tell a good story isn't necessarily going to get a job. You know what I mean? But
Right.
I do think being able to speak well about your experiences is important. That ties back to, your first question around skills and communication. I think being able to communicate well is such an important skill set in the world of work today, and almost any job. There's really, I don't know, many jobs that, you're not communicating as part of what you do in your day to day. But I would say definitely a lot of the times someone can come with maybe a little bit of a weaker communication skill set, but a super, super strong technical set of skills that they're bringing to the table, and they're amazing for the role that's needed. And I would say, you look at a candidate as a whole, ideally that's what companies are doing, and they're assessing the holistic set of experiences and skills that someone brings to the table.
Great. If you have to mention 3 skills that professionals should develop to be able to attract and land a dream job, what would be that 3 top skills they should have?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we talked about at the beginning, right, with your the skills for 2024. So I think that it's hard to say again for any blanket job, these are the top 3 skills, you know what I mean? So
Right.
I think it just depends on what the opportunity is, right? Like I go back to the same main things that we discussed, like communication is super important, that ownership mindset and being reliable, and that desire for growth, I think can be some blanket things to think about, but I think there's definitely more nuanced specifics by role.
Great. Great. What would you say the 3 strategies that candidates can apply to stand out in the job market today? What would that be?
So you mean like strategies essentially to
stand out? So, for example, I was talking to someone the other day that when a job is posted, if you don't apply in the next 48 hours, you're already late. Like, because the amount of people that apply for jobs now, it's very difficult to stand out. It's not difficult, but it's tougher to stand out. So what would you say from your experience are the 3 strategies that candidate can apply to stand out in the job market?
Yeah, maybe we'll talk through one and then can go a little deeper if that works for you.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think when we think about strategies, a lot of it goes back to what we were talking about before, in my opinion, on proactively building a network that is of value. So I think how one does that, I really loved your example. You showed up to Canada, you went to volunteer, you met people. And I think it's thinking about how are you connecting with others in your community, be it in person, be it virtually, to essentially have people know who you are, what you do, what you're interested in, what you bring to the table. I think that when it comes to standing out for a job opportunity, especially, we talked about the prairies and, Regina, Saskatoon area, or like being in Winnipeg, Manitoba, especially if you're from a smaller place, usually the degree of separation between people is 1, maybe 2, right? So when you're having a conversation with someone, any opportunity is a good opportunity to start creating some of those connections, to start building that community. And what I always say is when you're applying for a job, or if you see a job that's interesting in a company, look to see who you know, or who you know that knows someone that works there. I think that having your name flagged as a strong candidate, especially to your point from before, if you don't have the most traditional resume or the most traditional set of skills that would align for that job, but you really think you can be an excellent candidate, that having someone mention, hey, this person, I actually think they could be really great, can just be a good way to get in for an introductory call. I would always say, when it comes to then going through the interview process, that's up to each individual. And I always say it's super important to have really, really equitable processes. But sometimes a resume screening process is not a perfect science. So there can be people that are amazing that are missed. And I think it's those moments of having someone say, hey, you should check out this person, that can really help, especially for people that are coming with less traditional backgrounds.
So let's say someone who doesn't know anybody. For example, they don't have any network, for example, in Canada. And what would be your advice to them to be able to make that connection? Because what I see a lot of times is, oh, I don't have any network. I don't know anybody here. I'm just new here. How can they begin to build that relationship?
Yeah, I think honestly, just show up to things, right? Like there's so many events in everyone's community. There's, in Winnipeg, I recently went to Creative Mornings Winnipeg event. There were over 100 people there. It was 8 a.m. They did a walk earlier at like 7:30. Get out there and look at the events that are going on in your city. There's also tons of things after work. Like another one last night, I went to Tech Thursday in Winnipeg, which is an event for people within the tech community to get together. There's always a panel and networking. There's so many things that you can go to. And, if you're looking on LinkedIn at people that are within your city, they share, you know what I mean? I'm going to this, I'm going to that, and show up where those people are going. And that's how you start meeting the people that are active in your community, that essentially are going to the events, that are looking to make connections. So I think that it definitely can be overwhelming when you're new in a city, but I always say just start, right? Like get out to the event. And if you're feeling really overwhelmed by it, hopefully you have one friend in your new city that maybe can go with you. Or if not, you just show up alone. You know what I mean? I know it can be hard, but I think even if you're introverted, I always say just show up. You don't really have to do too much. Someone will talk to you. If you don't want to be the person that talks to someone else, at least one person will say hello. And that's just kind of how doors start opening in the beginning.
Great. How would you say social media or LinkedIn has helped, in driving that visibility for your personal brand? And what is it as important as people make it seem? Because it looks like everybody's saying, get on LinkedIn, connect. Is it really important in today's job market?
I mean, I think it depends on the field that you're in, for sure. I think that there's a lot of software engineers, like software developers, that are not on there or have a profile but never really use it because it's just not as common in what they do. Or people in totally different industries, like doctors, who are just like really not there at all. I have some friends that are like, wait, what is LinkedIn? So I think it really just depends on the field that you're in and how you use it. I think where it can be helpful is when we were talking more about the living resume, right? So if you want to have a place where people can see what you're up to, some people have personal websites, right? And they update those. It's kind of a way to showcase the things you've done in a more active way. But LinkedIn can kind of act as that too, without you having to build a website that then you're upkeeping. So it kind of depends on what your preference is. In some roles like product designers or some product managers too, they do still like to have their own websites just to showcase the portfolio of their work. But what I would say is I think where LinkedIn helps is people can get to know you a little bit better before they get to know you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when you asked about me personally, I find I write how I speak and it's very me, and when people talk to me versus read what I write, they're like, oh, it sounds like you. And I'm like, that's the point, because it's me, So one of the things that I always say is just if you do want to be someone that shares your thoughts and perspectives, share them as you. I think that's what resonates most with people when you're authentic. I think that tends to be what comes through. And sometimes if you write the way you think others want you to write, I think that sounds less like who you are and more like someone else. So my recommendation is always, share your perspectives, share your thoughts in a way that feels true to who you are and what you want to put out into the world. And I think that, sometimes people say, well, is there such a thing? What if I overshare? Or what if someone looks at something that I've said negatively? I mean, as long as you're not saying like really bad things, which, you probably shouldn't be saying, but if it is a perspective that's well thought out and a company doesn't think you're a good fit because of a thought that you truly believe in, it probably isn't the best work environment for you anyways. So in a way, I think what you do is you help attract more of the opportunities that are aligned with the places that you like and how you want to be operating, and less of those that are misaligned. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense. How can current employees navigate building their personal brand on LinkedIn, for example, and not conflicting with their organizational brand as well? Like, how have you been able to do that for yourself?
I think it's just open conversation, talk with, depending on your seniority, but talk with your CEO or your manager, whomever the right person might be, around, hey, I want to start sharing more content. This is what I'm thinking of sharing. these are my own thoughts. Any issues here? You know what I mean? Or, you know, it really is your account, you know? So not to say go write things that are totally misaligned with your employer, but again, I think as long as you're writing insightful content that is adding value, it, I think, would be rare for an employer to say, hey, we don't want you posting on LinkedIn about your learnings or your takeaways. I would say just, again, be mindful of what you're sharing, right? I always say that if you're saying anything that's super negative about someone or an organization, you know, I know one of the potential questions you shared with me in advance, which I really liked, was, you know, is there something that can stop someone from getting a job? And while I think, you know, interview processes are stressful, and I always say sometimes people can mess up, say the wrong thing. So I think it's super important to have grace. The one huge no that I have, and if this happens, this can actually be like, okay, it's not a good fit, is someone that talks really negatively about their past employer, or in this case, like maybe their current employer or a past or current manager. Because I think if you're talking so negatively about a company or a manager that you worked with or for, it shows that you're also not seeing perhaps what you contributed to the situation. Or even if it was absolutely not your fault at all, and it really was a horrible manager or a horrible company, there's still something to be learned from it, right? So I think in those moments, instead of sharing, this was horrible, blah, 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 it's like, here's what I learned from this experience that was challenging, right? So I think it's framing it around learning. So something I always say is like, we're either winning or we're learning, right? So even if you're in a situation that feels like a huge loss, reframe that around what did you learn.
Great. You caught me on that question there about the red flags. So you mentioned one to be, do not badmouth or say negative things about your past employer. It's one of the major red flags to not get a job. What would be the other two, or you know, that you would like to mention that candidates or job seekers should avoid during an interview?
Yeah, to be honest, that is my number one. I think that if you do that, that can be kind of like the hardest thing to get out of, because I think if you're not seeing that learning opportunity at all, or you're not seeing kind of how to talk about that in a different way, I always worry, you know, what would happen if your experience here isn't perfect, right? Or if your manager messes up, like how are you going to talk to them about it? How do you create that relationship that you're going to continue building? I will tell you one more. I don't know that I have three, but I have two. The secondary one that would be pretty much just as bad would be lying. I know this is a small and may sound silly, but like someone that lies about their past experiences or what they contributed in a role. I'll tell you a quick little story, but one time in an interview process, someone told me about all the impact that they had and the things that they built. And like, it was really, really impressive, right? And I was like, wow, I think they'd be an excellent candidate. And then it sounded like, from what they were talking about, that they were the ones that did this thing. And then in doing a reference check about this person, their past manager was like, oh yeah, like they did a good job, but they were a contributor in this larger project. And like, this is actually what they did. And I think speaking truthfully about your experiences and your impact is key, because the world is not that big. And if you say you did this whole thing, but this is actually what you did, and then a potential employer you're talking to speaks to a past colleague or a reference check comes up and like that becomes pretty clear, I think that can negatively affect your chances, because you're not someone that's essentially showcasing the work of others, or you're taking a lot of credit for other people's work, right? And I think it's super, super important to talk about the things you've done and your impact and how definitely that fits into a broader picture. But you want to be really careful that you're speaking the truth about your past experiences.
You're right. Speaking of reference, what would you say is the major requirement for references? Because I hear a lot of times people say, oh, I do not have, you know, professional references in this particular location, and you know, my references back home and all. How do, you know, recruiters or hiring managers navigate references to then decide, you know, this is what we would use as a reference, or what's the ideal kind of references they need?
I have no problem talking to someone from another country. We've done that many times. You know what I mean? Tell me whom you've worked with in the past and we'll call them. It's 2024. We can use Zoom. We can use WhatsApp audio. You know what I mean? I don't need a actual phone call. So I think just share openly and honestly. And you're getting at a really good point there too, which is just the value of work experience. I think as the world is becoming more global, looking at people's experiences as experience, regardless of if they were in Canada or not, is super key. And understanding like where are the parallels and maybe where are the gaps because the experience was somewhere else. But I do think nowadays there's a much more global aspect to work. So I would see no issue calling someone from another country.
Great. There was a recent stats from or trend from Forbes saying that companies are repelling talent when they should be attracting them. So when I read that, I was like, okay, and what are the things that if a recruiter is listening to this now, or a hiring manager is listening to this now, what are the things, 3 top strategies they should be focusing on to be able to attract top talent?
I love how you're always in threes, eh? We can't start with what's the way to start the strategies. Always has to be 3. I'm gonna make fun of you for it. So I think that, you know, when it comes to attracting talent, the number one thing, and I'm curious as to what the article that you read said, but the number one thing that I keep hearing in terms of what companies can do is be flexible in terms of the way that work is created for people and being intentional around how work is structured and set up. I think there's a lot of conversation around, you know, in office, from home, hybrid, but I think choice is what's most important, helping people figure out how can they work their best, what do they need in order to enable that, and making that a conversation when someone's going to start in an organization, I think can really, really attract top talent and set people up for success well. I think that I will give you 3 though, because I know you want 3. The secondary piece will always be there. And I mean, these are both number 1, so it's hard to rank them, but compensation matters. I think people work for money. It is a job. So I think making sure people feel like they're being paid well for the thing that they're doing matters, especially if you want to attract good talent. And then the last one ties to a lot of what we've been talking about, which is just opportunity for growth and advancement, right? So I think if you want to attract the best humans, if you're offering them that flexibility, a good compensation package, an opportunity for advancement, you'll find that that tends to be what resonates the most.
The most. Okay. We'll wrap it up here. We ask our guests 3 final questions. So you can answer the question in 1 word, or you can expatiate on the word. Number 1 question. If you were to write a book about your life, what would the title be?
My goodness. I don't know. I feel so put on the spot. It's actually so funny because my mom and I regularly talk about how I want to write a book one day, but I haven't yet because I'm not there yet. You know what I mean? Like I still don't know what my book is. So right now, let's call it's work in progress. You know what I mean?
But I think you should really write a book on people and culture, because the things you share, the insight you share for HR professionals is really, really helpful. So I think anything that would help people navigate people and culture, which is really key in organization, will really be helpful. So I really come back to that question in the future date. Okay. All right.
Okay,
the second question.
2? Yeah.
Okay, good. I look forward to the book anyway. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received that has influenced your life and career?
Interesting. I think that there's a few. I think that a good one to take away is almost no decision is permanent, and it's better to make the choice than to stay in the indecision. I'll tell you a tiny bit more why that is the case. Sometimes we make the wrong choice, but we can then do something about it. And like I said, learn from it. But sitting in that place where we just can't decide for too long can be worse than making the wrong choice. So I think that just remembering almost any decision is not permanent, just choosing something, testing that out, and moving forward or across the jungle gym is more helpful than just like staying in that decision paralysis too long.
Right. Well, that's very insightful because I know that's something that I hear often, people trying to decide, for example, the career. What do I do? I mean, I still hear people in their 30s say, you know what, I don't even know what to do. And I say to them sometimes, just make a choice. Do something that interests you. It doesn't have to be permanent. You can change careers, you can change jobs, you can, but don't stay in the point where you feel like there's something calling you from the inside to do more, but you haven't decided because you want to wait until the perfect time or the perfect decision.
Because there
Okay.
is no perfect, right?
Yeah,
There is
there
no
is.
perfect.
Okay. If you could, and this is one question that I think, if you could magically acquire one new language overnight, which would you choose and why?
Oh, excellent question. I have a quick answer. I'm going to
Oh,
go with Mandarin because I speak English, Spanish, and a little bit of French.
wow.
And I've always wanted to be able to speak Mandarin, but it's just so far away from any language that I know. And like, not something that I plan on doing in my life. But if I could just have this skill, I think it would be super cool.
And why Mandarin, if I may
It's
ask?
just, I think that it's highly spoken around the
Yeah,
world. You know what I
I
mean?
agree.
It would just
I agree.
be a really, really different language too. I find that also languages that are set up totally different in structure to the ones that you know expand your brain in unique ways. So who knows
Hmm.
what's in my
Hmm.
head that I don't know about
Right,
that
right.
Mandarin might uncover.
Right. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for being on this show. I know that we have a lot to talk about, but in a given time, thank you for sharing so openly. Is there any last words you'd like to leave with, that person who is in that point in their life where they've been looking for a job for months, they're looking for a job for, and they're getting frustrated. What would be your word of encouragement to such a person now?
Yeah, I love this as a closing question. I think that it can be really hard out there, right? We talked about at the beginning, there's been a ton of layoffs. Some companies hired too much, and now we're seeing the impacts of it. I do think that markets tend to correct themselves, right?
Mm,
So there will be more opportunities coming. It may just take longer than is ideal. What I always say is find a buddy. A
mm,
buddy through everything is super helpful, right? There's so many people right now that are also looking for jobs. If you don't know anyone personally, find someone that also posted on LinkedIn saying they were impacted by layoffs and say, hey, I was too. Can we just have like a 30-minute coffee chat? I want to hear how you're doing. Maybe we can exchange strategies or just vent.
mm.
Find someone going through a similar experience because I think in hard moments, we crave and we need human connection the most. And feeling like we're not alone can be super key to help us get that inertia to move forward.
Great, great, great. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful, and emphasizes the power of community. Because I think you can't go life alone, and no matter what you're going through, you're not designed to go through that thing alone. So reach out, find people. I'm a LinkedIn DM away. Feel free to reach out
100%.
to me. So thank you, Vanessa, for being on the show. It was great having you on the show today. So, what is the best way if people were to connect with you to learn more about what you do? What would the platform?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn. I mean, I think we've used that word like 20 times today.
Right.
You should get this sponsored by LinkedIn. But I think that's the best way to stay in touch for sure.
Great, great. We'll have all Vanessa's information, her LinkedIn profile. We'll put it on the show notes so you can connect and learn more. She shares a lot about, the HR process. If you're new to Canada as well, she shares a lot of information that will be helpful. And if you're a HR professional trying to navigate the whole process, she does a lot of, insightful posts on that. So thank you for being on the show. Remember, guys, your growth is personal. No one is responsible for your personal growth. But you please leave a comment, share, like, and talk to your friend about this podcast. And I hope to see you in the next video. Stay blessed and bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you love this episode, share it with your friends on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. If you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our episode, and give us a rating. This will help our podcast get more visibility to those who don't know about this podcast. Remember, your growth is personal. No one is responsible for your personal growth but you. Stay blessed.